Hi, I'm Dave Sivers, and I'm about to read you the first chapter of my new book, In Flames. It's book 3 of the DI Nathan Quarrel series, and here we go. Chapter 1, Tuesday. Anthea Swallow poured herself another large mug of black coffee and decided to drink this one in the sitting room. En route, she paused by the big Art Deco mirror in the hall and regarded herself. The woman who looked back at her seemed like a pale imitation of the person she used to be not so very long ago. She knew she owed so much of her looks to her perfect Nordic bone structure, but now that seemed to accentuate the dark circles that hollowed her eye sockets. Her skin, always fair, was unhealthily pale, whilst her white blonde hair lacked lustre. Even her normally tall, upright posture seemed to have been replaced by a slumped, hunching stance, almost as if she was deliberately making herself harder to be seen or noticed, which, let's face it, she was. Even back in her wild younger days as a supermodel, already married and divorced once, falling in and out of a succession of actors and rock musicians' beds, and fueling her lifestyle with drugs and alcohol, even then she kept her looks. And then Jimmy had got her through the dependency. Until a few months ago, she still looked fantastic for her age, loving the simpler life she made in the Hertfordshire village of Little Gadsden. On the wagon for decades now, her energy is focused on charity and the church in nearby Albury. She'd honestly thought she was stronger than this, that her marriage to Jimmy and this life had made her strong. Now she thought strength was an illusion. Anyone could break under enough pressure, and nobody knew what their breaking point was until they reached it. Other famous women had seemingly toughed out what she'd been going through and worse, but everyone was different. The big difference in her case, she supposed, was that she'd really thought she'd left her headline-making past behind. Not so much reinvented herself as reclaimed the ordinary kid she'd been before the scout from the modelling agency had clapped eyes on her. The new Anthea had provided no fodder for the paparazzi. A celebrity serving teas at the village fete soon lost its novelty value, especially when there were so many current celebrities out there to feast on. And then she'd written the bloody book. She sighed, making a conscious effort to stand more upright, and moved on into the sitting room, taking her favourite chair by the bay window, looking out over the garden. Jasper, Jimmy's monstrous hound, his bark and bulk terrifying, but a secret softy at heart, had followed her in and sat down beside her. She absently scratched between his ears. The clock in the hall began to strike. 7 a.m. She'd been up half the night again. She'd watched first light breaking, and she supposed the dawn chorus had lifted her spirits a little. She knew the insomnia was part of, and in turn caused by, her troubles. She envied her husband, who had slept on undisturbed as she'd risen. His snore pattern hadn't even faltered. Anthea wondered how the private investigator Jimmy had hired might be getting on. Ex-police he talked a good fight, said he had contacts who could run her nemesis to ground. She didn't like him, didn't like the way she caught him looking at her. And so far, all he delivered was excuses and Jan tomorrow promises. But he was all they had. Jimmy seemed to have faith in him, and the real police were totally useless. She was about to take a first sip of her coffee when the boom of the doorbell, operated by an old-fashioned looking bell pull by the electronic gates into the driveway, and very much in keeping with the almost gothic pile they lived in, made her jump, spilling a few drops of dark liquid on her dressing gown. It set off Jasper, hurtling out into the hall, his barks a fusillade, to fling himself against the front door. Who called at 7 in the morning? Jasper was still barking. Surely Jimmy couldn't sleep through all this. Not that she'd lay odds on that. She'd often joked that a nuclear war wouldn't wake him. For a few more moments, reluctance warred with curiosity. The latter won out, and she rose and headed in the direction of Jasper's barks, which were becoming more half-hearted by now. Perhaps whoever rang the bell had already gone. She reached the door. "Knock it off, Jasper," she muttered as she put her eye to the spy hole to look down the drive to the tall metal gates, fancy new ones added at the private detective's urging. She was just in time to see a dark van pulling away. Courier, she thought. Since COVID, couriers dumping a parcel and buggering off without even ringing had all but become the norm. Actually, ringing the bell bordered on conscientious. It was early for a courier, but not an unheard of time. She wasn't expecting anything, but Jimmy was an online shopaholic. He was always ordering random bits of recording equipment, guitar picks, even though there must be hundreds of the bloody things all over the house, T-shirts, how many did one man need, and gadgets that were almost always a 5-minute wonder. Jasper had grown quiet. She shrugged. She was up anyway, so she might as well see. Still, she put the chain on before drawing the bolts, unlocking the door and inching it open a crack. The morning air that greeted her was comfortably cool, not at all bad for May. Her eyes scanned the drive, and she could see it now, a massive black bag just beyond the gates. What the hell? Sometimes Jimmy told her what he'd ordered, even showed her what he fancied buying before he committed. The less likely what she was to be impressed or to approve, the more likely he was to forget to mention it until the order arrived. He would get all sheepish if she showed any displeasure, but then insisted that returning it now was too much hassle. It could be irritating, but it was part of the big kid in him that she loved. This thing, though, what had he splashed out on this time? Whatever it was, lying out there in the open might not do it a lot of good, and it was vulnerable to opportunist thieves. Not that Little Gadsden was exactly the crime capital of the world. One thing was for sure. She wasn't about to go out there in her dressing gown and slippers. The paparazzi who had swarmed when the videos first broke had soon tired of the story and moved on. But you couldn't be sure some freelancer wasn't out there with a long lens. Jimmy insisted it was paranoid thinking, but that didn't mean they weren't out to get her. No, this was not her problem. It took 3 lots of shakes to drag Jimmy out of his slumber. The one-time high priest of goth rock stared at her reproachfully, blinking and mumbling. "You need to get up, sunshine," she said briskly. "You've been shopping again, and there's a great big parcel outside the gate." He screwed his sleepy face up. "No idea what that is." "Of course you haven't, darling," she shrugged. "It's up to you. I've told you it's there. I'm not lugging it in. I guess it's about 6 foot across. Ring any bells?" He sighed and sat up. "Nope. And I'd remember something that size." Maybe the courier got the wrong address. Wouldn't be the first time. That was true enough. The life-size, very realistic plastic skeleton delivered to the president of the local WI was still the stuff of local folklore. It now hung in the corner of his home studio, dressed in one of his more outrageous stage costumes and christened Mr. Bones. But whatever and whoever's it was, she still didn't like to just leave it lying around like that. Someone must have ordered it. "All right," he decided grumpily. "I suppose I'm awake now. Give me a sec." They both pulled on clothes and she followed him downstairs. Jimmy grabbed his keys off the hall console table, opened the front door, and stepped outside, Jasper at his heels towards the gates. Anthea stood on the step, arms folded, watching as he thumbed the button on his key fob, waited for the gates to swing open, then moved closer. Unobscured by the gates, she could see the bag better, see how it lay. She had an unpleasant thought and immediately chided herself for being so stupid. Even as she did so, she noticed that Jasper, normally his master's shadow, was hanging back, tail down and ears flat. Meanwhile, Jimmy, who had briefly hunkered down by the bag, stood up and turned to face her. Pretty weird, he called. Not a courier's label, but there's a gift tag. From who? That's just it. No name. All it says is, to the Steeles, for the memories. She knew she was frowning. What memories? Buggered if I know. Looks like it might be heavy. I think I'll drag it through the gate and have a look inside. At least there's a zip. What's up with you, boy? This last directed at Jasper, who was whining. Anthea was liking this less and less. She really ought to go and help her husband, but she was rooted to the doorstep. Actually, he remarked as he dragged the bag on the floor, it doesn't weigh that much. At least it's not a body. She knew he was joking, but she didn't find it particularly funny. It had better not be another bloody skeleton. Company furnished Mr. Bones? Nice idea, but not guilty. He dragged it a few feet inside the gate and knelt down beside it. Let's have a look at you, she heard him say as he reached for the zip and began to slide it down. She didn't want him to, but begging him to leave the thing alone would be ridiculous. Seconds later, he gave a strangled cry. Fuck! He scrambled to his feet. Fuck! Oh, fuck! He started running towards her, the fastest she'd seen him move off stage for years. Get inside, he yelled. Call the police. She stood nailed to the step, trying to form questions. Now, he insisted.